Hey everyone, welcome to Logan's Mosh Pit. Glad to have you here. Do me a favor and please subscribe if you haven't already. Brace yourselves for another episode of Rock and Read. This week we're going to find out what happens in Chapter 9 of Janis, Her Life in Music. Chapter 9 is called Meth Freak and the Saturday Night Swindle. Wonder what that means. As always, we have a quote from Janis at the top which says, "Cosmic blues means no matter what you do, you get shot down anyway. One day I finally realized it ain't never gonna be alright. There's always something going wrong. It's what you wish was that makes unhappiness. The hole, the vacuum." With that, let's get started. After 6 months of performing and steadily gaining fans in the Bay Area, Janis began to lose focus. As in Austin, following an initial period of excitement and commitment to singing, she ran into resistance, or in some cases, thwarted her own chances of breaking out. Then, in the weeks following, her restlessness nearly ate her alive, fueling her drinking and pill-popping. When she eventually reached out to her father for help, he gave as best he could, but his own bleak outlook on life would serve as a shattering revelation to Janis. Disappointment, suffering, and pain, he told her, would be her constant companions, no matter how hard she tried to escape them. Father of the Year right there. "I did really great in my singing when I first got there," Janis wrote in a 1965 letter. "People treated me as if I was going to be famous, but it was only a few months till I was drunk all the time and hanging out on Green Street at the Anxious Asp. Sure is a sordid story, isn't it?" Her aborted booking at Top of the Tangent wasn't Janis's only no-show. Rodney Albin, director of the San Francisco State College Folk Music Festival, hired her to perform at a prestigious day-long concert, listed in the program as Janet Joplin. But on May 23, 1963, the weekend after she met Bob Dylan at Monterey, she didn't turn up. Why show up if they're going to get your name wrong, right? Janis had saved enough money to take off for Dylan's stomping grounds in New York City. Later in the fall, she prowled the village scene, checking out Gerd's Folk City on West 4th Street, where Dylan had played his Manhattan debut 2 years earlier. Seeking connection and comfort, she moved on to Port Arthur to spend Christmas with her family, but Texas felt more oppressive than ever, especially after President John F. Kennedy had been assassinated in Dallas on November 22nd. Janis visited old friends at Jim and Ray Langdon's party in Lafayette, Louisiana, where Jim now worked as a newspaper reporter. Among the Port Arthur crowd, Janis was the only one who had flown far, far away. In early 1964, back in San Francisco for her 21st birthday, Janis's drinking escalated. Since she and Jay Whittaker had broken up, she was again without a home and drifted from place to place. She partied in North Beach bars with Linda Gottfried and pals such as Jim Forat, who soon became a prominent gay activist and helped bring about the decriminalization of homosexuality in San Francisco in 1976. "I'd see Janis at the coffee gallery, and afterward we'd go out drinking," said Forat. "We didn't have money, so occasionally we'd go to restaurants, eat, go to the bathroom, then leave out the back door without paying." He was drawn to Janis's raucous sense of humor, and the pair spent nights carousing and getting drunk, after which he'd sneak her into his male-only boarding house. Though absent for a while, Janis hadn't been forgotten by club owners or musicians, and her reputation as an extraordinary singer continued to spread. She bought a second-hand Vespa to travel more easily to gigs in Berkeley and all around the Bay Area. According to her California driver's license, issued February 21, 1964, she was living at 1515 Go Street in Lower Pacific Heights, then a cheap neighborhood of San Francisco. The Cabell, opened by Cambridge folkies Debbie Green and Rolf Kahn, Barbara Dane's former husband in 1963, was Berkeley's premier coffee house. Originally a shoe store, it was long and narrow, with rows of tables and chairs facing the stage. One February evening, Janis showed up early, prior to a later coffee gallery booking. Performing at the Cabell that night was Bob Newrith, an East Coast musician and painter, soon to become Dylan's aide-de-camp, and years later, Janis's. Green asked Newworth if Janis could do a song before his set. "She got up and sang a cappella and knocked everybody out," Newworth recalled. Then she said, "I gotta get back to North Beach." She jumped on her motor scooter, pulled onto San Pablo, and got hit by a car. Everyone ran onto the street. I put my jacket under her head, and then the ambulance took her. She didn't want to go to the hospital. She wanted to get back to San Francisco. The extent of Janis's injuries, possibly a serious leg wound, and the length of her hospitalization are unknown. She didn't notify her family, but the accident further derailed her. Record people had come in from LA, heard her, and said, "Oh, she's fabulous." Remembered her friend Chet Helms, who kept tabs on her career. One was from RCA, and Janis was on the verge of a big deal that would have transformed her, monetary-wise and career-wise. Then she had the accident on her Vespa and totaled it and ended up in the hospital. The deal just went away during the course of her recovery. After Janis recuperated, she traveled with LA native Linda Gottfried to Los Angeles to try her luck at the city's two major folk clubs, Doug Weston's Troubadour and the Ash Grove. Through Gottfried, she met session guitarist Steve Mann, who offered to back her at the Troubadour's open mic night. Working up a couple of numbers backstage with Janis, Mann was impressed that she could get her body and soul into that deep-down black blues sound, he said. After the show, she had no place to go, so I invited her home to stay at my folks' house. She was fun, never a dull moment. Janis sang him some originals, another aspect of her musicianship that fascinated him. In San Jose, Janis reconnected with Jorma Kaukonen, recently married and finishing college. He continued to pursue music, sometimes playing with Steve Mann, and had purchased a Sony reel-to-reel tape recorder. He invited Janis to his Fremont Street home to rehearse a set of songs. We just fit together, according to Kaukonen. Janis was great any time I was around her, because it was always about the music. We both loved it so much. Kaukonen flipped on his recorder to capture their rehearsal while his Swedish wife, Margareta, seated in the small room, typed a letter to her family. The so-called typewriter tapes, a bootleg that circulated for decades, document the musicians, which also included Steve Mann, laughing and enjoying themselves, working on song arrangements and exchanging compliments as the tunes come together. Kidding around, Janis demonstrated an exaggerated soprano theater voice and joked about a chiffon dress she planned to wear on stage before a gold lame curtain. The tape captured their performances of the Reverend Gary Davis's Hesitation Blues, Smith's Nobody Knows You When You're Down and Out, and Lonnie Johnson's Long Black Train Blues, with mournful lyrics such as, "That train starts off slowly, my tears keep streaming down. I cried, oh Lord, why was I left in this God-forsaken town?" Backed by Kaukonen, Janis was more relaxed than when performing solo. While he showed off his expert finger-picking, she improvised her vocals. Among the musicians who sometimes joined them was Steve Richmond Talbot, an accomplished blues guitarist as well as a brakesman on the Southern Pacific Railroad. When they played Janis's Mary Jane, many mistakenly thought it a Bessie Smith song. Inspired by 1920s hokum jazz numbers, its lyrics glorify the joys of marijuana. Well, I've known women that wanted no man, some that wanted to say, but I never knew what happened in this world till I met up with Mary Jane. Oh, when I'm feeling lonesome and I'm feeling blue, there's only one way to change. I walk down the street now looking for a man, one that knows my Mary Jane. 4 months after her return in April 1964, Janis once again left San Francisco, this time with a former girlfriend of Jay Whittaker's named Linda Poole, a supporter of her music. Janis purchased a cheap second-hand Morris Minor and drove the spindly yellow British convertible straight to Austin, swallowing speed along the route. On April 16th, self-confident and cheery, Janis performed for the first time in 15 months at Threadgill's alongside her mentor, Mr. Threadgill and the Waller Creek Boys. A friend recorded the set, which included their old repertoire, as well as Hank Thompson's 1960 honky-tonk number, A Six-Pack to Go, with Janis tooting a kazoo. The night ended with everyone joining in on a rousing version of the Carter family's Will the Circle Be Unbroken. Then their final destination, New York City, where Janis and Poole crashed at the Lower East Side apartment of bartender-actor Ken Hill, a former San Franciscan. The neighborhood, filled with abandoned buildings and burned-out cars, had plenty of cheap apartments for artists, musicians, and writers, in addition to Ukrainian and Polish immigrants and Puerto Rican families. Muggings and robberies were routine in the area, and drug dealers hung out on street corners. Hill attended bar at the Old Reliable, an Eastern European tavern on 3rd Street between Avenues B and C, with an off-Broadway theater in its back room. It became Janis's hangout, as did Slug's Saloon, a music venue down the block, both of which offered dirt-cheap drinks. Slug's owner Jerry Schultz booked primarily modern jazz, including Sun Ra, Ornette Coleman, and Sonny Rollins. Decades later, the building housed the Nuyorican Poets Cafe. On off nights, he let Janis accompany herself on guitar to a smattering of people. On Monday, May 25th, she performed at Gert's Folk City, sharing an open mic with accomplished folk guitarist Jerry Silverman. At Village Folk Club, she noticed guitarists playing louder acoustic 12 strings, so she bought one and tried to teach herself the more difficult instrument. But the British invasion's electric rock and roll predominated that summer, blaring from car and apartment windows. The Beatles scored 6 number ones in 1964, displacing folk music among both tastemakers and music fans. Janis called her parents from New York to assure them that she was working as a key punch operator and singing in clubs on weekends. Dorothy Joplin, in a sign of support, made and mailed her daughter a costume for her appearances, a blouse embellished with mirrors and orange embroidery and a scarlet and white satin cape. Janis gave away the clothes and kept wearing her daily uniform of a black shirt and Levi's. She'd lost weight because of her frequent speed intake, and she had lopped off her hair. During Janis's nearly 4 months in New York, it's unclear how often she actually worked or performed there. Some who knew her thought she earned a shaky living hustling pool games and neighborhood bars. She spent much of her time drinking at gay bars and popping pills with a stocky, short-haired butch lesbian named Adrienne, according to Janis Knoll, whose fourth-floor walk-up on East 2nd Street between Avenues A and B was one of Janis's crash pads. Janis and her husband, Edward Knoll, like many in the neighborhood, injected speed. In July, Janis and Adrienne announced they wanted to shoot speed, and Janis initiated them. Just months later, Ed Sanders, a poet and co-founder of folk rock anarchist combo The Fugs, had filmed an underground documentary, Amphetamine Head, a study of power in America. It depicted neighborhood residents hitting up in a shooting gallery near the Knowles apartment. Anyone who lived on the Lower East Side and spent much time mixing with the street culture encountered A-heads, Sanders wrote in a 2012 memoir. They roamed the streets, bistros and pads, shooting, snorting, or gobbling unearthly amounts of amphetamine. In some apartments, he observed, a hypodermic needle boiling on a gas ring was almost as prevalent as a folk guitar by the bed. Janis later looked back at the stifling atmosphere of her New York summer as part of my gay period. First Jay, then Linda Poole, and I went to New York, where I was running around with and taking Dexamyl constantly. I finally escaped that. The impetus to leave New York, she would claim, was to return to San Francisco for the first time, kind of wanting to find an old man and be happy. Later she would view her Manhattan venture and her return to San Francisco as her going out into the world with great vigor and need, and every time getting really up. En route to California in late August, Janis stopped in Port Arthur where she put on a show for her family about her grand time in New York. She picked up her 15-year-old sister Laura from school band practice and gave her the beat-up acoustic she had replaced with the 12-string guitar. In the front bedroom off the kitchen, Laura wrote later, Janis played and sang some deep-throated blues and showed me how to bar chord and slide across the frets. During her brief visit, her analytical father said Laura warned Janis about her rickety convertible's copious oil leak, but she countered with, I love it. It's just so great to drive cross-country with my hair in the breeze. To reassure them, Janis sent 2 postcards along the way, one from Reno. Unfortunately, the Nugget was filled, so I slept in the backseat of my car, parked in a Royal gas station, and one with an image of the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge and printed in big block letters, Thursday, 10:30 a.m. Sigh. Upon her return, Janis's pal Dave Archer from Coffee and Confusion recommended digs in the 19th Century Goodman Building at 1117 Geary Boulevard in the low-rent Fillmore district. She soon lived across the hall from me, Archer wrote in a 2002 memoir, a tiny box with a sleeping loft. Janis took up with Malcolm Waldron, a biker from Detroit, and he moved in for a while. Back singing at her usual haunts, Janis connected with a popular Dixieland jazz band leader in Berkeley named Dick Oxtott. A 44-year-old multi-instrumentalist and former mailman, he was the rare musician who hired women. Years later, Oxtott recalled that one night, while his 6-piece outfit was playing the cabale, a tough-looking gal roared up on a motorcycle with Waldron. After Janis sat in with them, the bandleader was so impressed that he hired her as his new singer. Soon after, he invited her to cut some songs in a Berkeley studio. Though she had sung into a reel-to-reel recorder several times, the occasion marked Janis's first proper recording session. With a New Orleans-style intro on clarinet, trombone, and cornet, Janis trilled her vibrato on the folk gospel staple River Jordan. They also did a jaunty Walk Right In, a 1929 number written by Gus Cannon's Jug Stompers that had become a big hit for the Rooftop Singers in 1963. Janis sang from her crotch, in the parlance of the folk trio's guitarist Eric Darling, followed by a modulation at the end, hitting the highest notes in her range. Packed by piano and horns, her Mary Jane complemented the 1920s selections. She was also sensational, said Oxtott, on Black Mountain Blues and Careless Love. Oxtott played the recordings for acclaimed jazz band leader Turk Murphy to see if he'd like to feature Janis. Murphy dug the sound, and, sight unseen, he told Oxtott to bring her to his next gig so she could join him on a number. Wearing a black cocktail dress provided by Oxtott's wife, Janis sat with the Oxtotts right in the front of the stage. But Murphy ignored them. During a break, Oxtott approached him to ask when Janis could sing, and Murphy told him, "I can't let her up here. She's a beatnik." Humiliated, Janis quit singing with Oxtott as well. Soon after, she contacted guitarist Steve Mann to accompany her. She'd moved upstairs into a larger apartment, sharing it with Linda Gottfried, and asked Mann to bring over his reel-to-reel. I packed up my recorder with a reel of tape and a microphone, and went over there to her place on the bus. Mann recalled. She rolled him joints from a mayonnaise jar full of weed. I'd smoke one and I'd be there. It was good stuff. But when she sang, she didn't smoke pot. Occasionally swinging from a bottle, Janis belted out those blues and gave all her energy to the music, he said. Her voice just poured through me and came out my fingers. We recorded about 8 or 9 songs, all blues. All the songs were from her repertoire, not mine. But anything Janis sang, I just found her key and we started in, because it was just the best old down-home blues singing possible. She was really good at taking cues and feeling when it was time for a guitar break. We both knew when the song was going to end, and it all came out great on the tape. She was a pro. Since her return from New York, Janis had gone from popping Purple Hearts to shooting methamphetamine. Much like on the Lower East Side, the drug later known as crystal meth proliferated in the Bay Area. The previous January, to meet the growing demand, a self-taught chemist named Augustus Owsley Stanley III moved from LA to Berkeley and set up a makeshift lab to manufacture the drug, before switching to the compound for which the name Owsley would become synonymous, LSD. In North Beach, dealers selling meth hung out at the Hot Dog Palace on Grand Avenue. We walked right into a speed crowd, Chet Helms said later about the 24-hour Greasy Spoon, also known as the Ant Palace. I found Linda Gottfried and became a meth freak, is how Janis put it. In the beginning, we thought our creativity was growing, Linda Gottfried explained. Wow, we can work all day and all night. Janis was painting, writing songs, studying blues singers, phraseology. Their SRO became a gallery of speed-induced artwork. Janis and Linda hunkered down there, Dave Archer recounted, sitting up in bed day and night for weeks, making hundreds of ink drawings that ended up all over the floor and walls. Their drawings covered the walls, floor, bed, dresser, and window ledge. Janis's meth-induced euphoric binges fizzled into black depressions, relieved only by the next speed rush. One night, sitting in a bar, she wrote an anguished letter to her father at his office. Their private correspondence no longer exists. Seth destroyed it. Janis later described having written about how you guys always told me it was going to get better, and I always thought it was an incline up, and that one day it would level off. And you know, Mother, it ain't leveling off. I felt God had played a joke on us, and I was off. Seth Joplin, concocting a business trip, flew to San Francisco to check on his daughter. In anticipation of his arrival, Archer wrote, Janis got her friends to help her clean up the 1,800 drawings, cluttering the apartment and disguise her true situation. The plan was that Linda would help Janis with a makeover, from beat chick on major drugs and alcohol to semi-professional beat about town. Archer explained, I ran into Janis in the hall one day, dressed her for a test run, her hair pinned into something semi-stylish, wearing makeup, plus a nice skirt with sensible flats. I laughed. Don't laugh, Mother. But Janis was laughing the hardest. It will always be one of my fondest memories. Janis standing there in that preposterous get-up, with that smirk, and then laughing like a ventriloquist using a witch puppet. Janis's ruse worked, or her father saw only what he had wanted to see. She was living in a little old, scruffy apartment, Seth said later, and seemed to be getting by all right. She wasn't visibly on dope. She was drawing welfare. She did what she wanted to do, including zipping up and down the San Francisco hills in her Morris Minor, her dad holding on for dear life. It sure scared me, he recounted. She never would slow down, both feet on the floor, one on the accelerator and one on the brake. Seth couldn't reassure his daughter that things would turn around, and was equally incapable of reacting emotionally to her despair. Instead, he confirmed that she had discovered what, in his mind, was life's dark truth. He called that truth the Great Saturday Night Swindle. People mistakenly believing that if they work hard all week, they'll get to have fun on the weekend, that there will be a payoff for the drudgery and hardship of everyday life. But what actually happens is that the reward never materializes. You'll be cheated by life, the Saturday night swindle in his words, leading to a life filled with disappointment and unhappiness. Seth could only advise Janis to accept this depressing fact intellectually, and, as he had, to endure it. Linda Gottfried remembered Seth's visit. He was really intelligent, and he talked to her directly, looking her in the eye. Janis, too, never forgot their Saturday night swindle talk. It's one of the few things I can remember clearly from that drug-addled time, she told journalist David Dalton 5 years later. It struck me like a light bulb, Janis recalled. That's all there was. The realization only made her more off, fueling her drugging and drinking. She would later give the swindle her own name, the Cosmic Blues, which to her means no matter what you do, you'll get shot down anyway. By her 22nd birthday in January, Janis was a full-blown meth addict, with the time between injections shortening by the day. I wanted to smoke dope, take dope, lick dope, suck dope, anything I could lay my hands on. I wanted to do it. Hey man, what is it? I'll try it. How do you do it? Do you suck it? No. Do you swallow it? I'll swallow it. Janis continued looking for an old man and shagged a succession, including one of her guitarists, Michael Pritchard, who recalled their first 6 days together as 24 hours a day, real intense. She mooned over Patrick Cassidy, a handsome beat poet who it turned out had been married to a woman who would later be Janis's closest friend. Linda paired off with Janis's former fling, Malcolm Waldron, while Janis set her sights on one of the Amp House's most colorful people, George the Beast Howell. A sometime night watchman at the SRO Hotel Dante, George the Beast was a big man and kind of a poet, wrote one North Beach resident. He slept where he could and cultivated acquaintance with the rotters, pimps, poets, and crystal merchants who congregated after midnight at the Hot Dog Palace. He looked like a biker, wore an army fatigue jacket and a gold earring, and had severe mood swings, veering from congenial to violent. Their relationship was really stormy, Linda Gottfried observed. He didn't give her many strokes. Janis dealt speed to support her increasing habit. Pat Nichols, who later took the name Sunshine, remembered a pretty messed up Janis pounding on my door. This is a 3-story house, and I'm shouting down the stairs, "Who is it?" And she said, "It's Janis Joplin. I want to sell you some speed." The meth took a mental and physical toll. Her face broke out, and barely eating, she dwindled to skin and bones. Janis and Linda Gottfried moved into a cheaper, windowless basement apartment, $25 a month, on Baker Street, where they holed up and shot meth daily. One night, outside the Anxious Ass, Janis was badly beaten by bikers, to whom she probably owed money for drugs. She lost her status at the places she used to perform, and instead became known as someone who'd ask for an advance, take a break from the set, and then not return to finish, or not show up at all. At Coffee and Confusion, Sylvia Fennell posted a handwritten sign. Anyone caught giving Janis Joplin money before the end of her set will be fired. Any customer who gives her money will be 86th. Soon, her gigs dried up. When she attempted to join the Mainlanders, a band formed by San Francisco State art student George Hunter, he rebuffed her. She wasn't in real good shape, said Hunter, who'd borrowed one of her jazz LPs. The term speed freak is pretty accurate in her case. I couldn't see integrating her into my band because she was such a mess. Through Janis and Edward Knoll, who had moved from the East Village to San Francisco, Janis met a man who appeared to be the opposite of those she had been seeing. Suavely handsome, well-dressed, and articulate. New Yorker Peter DeBlanc called himself an engineer like Seth Joplin with a master's degree. He drove a Land Rover and claimed to come from old money. Peter was this very charismatic person, Linda Gottfried recounted. A real gentleman, Mr. Smooth Talk. He and Janis became inseparable. He loved Janis, and she loved him, said Gottfried. This was a great love affair, and the first time I ever really saw Janis's heart open. And like Janis, he was crazy for meth. Janis had nearly stopped singing. DeBlanc didn't care for the blues and preferred pretty soprano voices. Her days and nights with Peter mostly revolved around speed and its effects, DeBlanc throwing a rubber ball for hours against the apartment wall. Janis weighed less than 100 pounds, and DeBlanc, suffering from delusions, began stashing guns in his car. He had advanced paranoia and thought he was receiving messages from people on the moon, said Gottfried. DeBlanc told Janis he wanted to marry her after they got clean. Hallucinating and delusional, he committed himself to a hospital psych ward. Chet Helms heard from friends about Janis's condition and stopped by her apartment. She was emaciated, almost catatonic, just not responding, he recalled. Janis would change her mind 200 times before she got to the door. That's like terminal speed. Linda Gottfried planned to join Malcolm Waldron in Hawaii to get clean, and Janis agreed to return to Texas. Her friends raised enough money for a bus ticket home. DeBlanc, still suffering from delusions, was hospitalized again. They promised to reunite in Port Arthur once they were both free of their addictions. In May 1965, after a farewell party, Janis boarded a Texas-bound Greyhound. A few years later, in retelling the story of this San Francisco residency, Janis underplayed how harrowing the end had been, and she elongated the sporadic 2.5 years she spent there. I stayed there for 5 years, she said, doing what young people do, finding out and changing and hanging out and bumming around. I guess you'd call it. I decided to go back home and straighten out, go back to college, even get married. For the first time in her life, Janis had fully pledged her heart to someone, but her relationship with Peter DeBlanc turned out to be the biggest Saturday night swindle of all. That's the end of Chapter 9. Let me know what you guys thought of Chapter 9 in the comments. That does it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate the support. I'll see you next time. Until then, rock on.